Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode on Aquarius season. I have got a bit of a power tool happening somewhere in the neighbourhood, so hopefully that is not too bad. I will start again if it is. But yeah, here we are in Aquarius season. Did you find that things got a bit heavy, a bit serious over Capricorn season over the last 3 or so weeks? Well, if you did, it's time to lighten up a bit again as we head into Aquarius season. Quirky, airy Aquarius. So please do be aware, if you are not already, that I do work with the sidereal zodiac. So I work with sidereal astrology, and what that means is that astrology is considered from the placement of the stars where they actually are. So it's basically astronomical astrology. So it is in agreement with what an astronomer would tell you about where the placements of the stars, or really their planets, are. So if you want more explanation about that, then there will be a link in the notes where you can hop on over to my website and get a lot more detail on that. But just in case you're wondering why I'm talking about Aquarius season when you might think that we're about to go into Pisces, well, I have news for you that we're not. So the sun actually rises in the constellation of Aquarius from the 16th of February through to the 9th of March 2022. So I am currently based in Melbourne, Australia, and depending on where you are in the world, you may find that that date slips over the dateline and so is a day earlier for you. The sun moves into Aquarius on the 15th of February. So I said the sun rises in Aquarius from the 16th. So it actually moves into Aquarius on the 15th where I am. If you did have a look at the information about sidereal astrology, you'll realise that one of the things, or the key thing really about sidereal astrology, is that it takes into account the precession of the equinoxes, so therefore these dates are not set in stone. Over almost 3/4 of a century, the dates will move by one day. So there'll be enough degrees of difference to mean that the sun is moving into the sign a day later than it currently is. So if you've been paying attention to this series, and this is the second last one, so that's kind of sad and kind of exciting. But we've seen for the last few signs that there's really no match up very much between the dates of the sidereal zodiac and tropical Western astrology dates, which is the astrology that most people are aware of. It's what's in the newspapers, it's what's most readily available. But luckily, more and more people are becoming aware of sidereal and the fact that in tropical Western, we're not actually talking about where the planets actually are. So it's not astronomically correct, and I much prefer to use a system that is in alignment with where the planets actually are. So tropical Western astrology dates for Aquarius are about the 20th of January to the 18th of February. So there's only those few days of overlap with sidereal astrology, so right at the end of the tropical Western Aquarius season and the beginning of the sidereal. So if that means that you have thought of yourself as an Aquarius, or you've thought of yourself as a Pisces, and now suddenly I'm telling you something different, you may have a bit of an identity crisis coming on. And that is totally understandable. But I would imagine that most likely what we'd find if we did your chart is that you do still have a strong Aquarius energy if that's something that you really identify with. So perhaps your moon is in Aquarius, perhaps you have an Aquarius rising, perhaps you have a stellium, which is 2 or more planets in the sign of Aquarius. The best way to check that out is to do a reading with me, and once again there'll be a link in the notes for you to be able to do that. So who really needs to pay attention to this information? Well, obviously people who are born between those dates that I've mentioned, and we would go back a day, so we'd say people who were born between February the 15th and March the 9th, because depending on how long ago they were born, it may be that the sun was in Aquarius already on the 15th. So that means that your sun sign is Aquarius. The sun was in that sign when you were born, and you identify as an Aquarius. So you most likely see yourself as one of a kind. You see yourself as very progressive in your thinking, and also you may well be very focused on the greater good. So it's kind of a very outward looking mental energy with Aquarius. It's not so internally focused. People who know their astrology chart and can see that their moon or their rising is in Aquarius, definitely this information is going to be really pertinent for you as well. So if your moon is in Aquarius, it means you need to feel Aquarius qualities for your emotional well-being. So you need to feel like you can maintain your freedom at all costs. You highly value honesty and cooperation from others as well. If your ascendant or your rising sign is Aquarius, that means this is the constellation that was on the eastern horizon when you were born, and that is what you are becoming or developing in this lifetime. If Aquarius is your rising sign, that means you're working towards original and inventive ways of improving life for all. So lastly, again, if you can read your astrology chart and you can see that you have Aquarius on the cusp of your 6th house, or really anywhere in your 6th house, then this information that I'm going to provide is largely focused on medical astrology. So it's astrology talking about your health and well-being, and that 6th house is our house of health and well-being. So all the information I'm going to give you if you have Aquarius in your 6th house is really, really relevant. And if you don't have any idea what I'm talking about when I talk about houses, the 6th house, then please hop on back to the Aquarius, the Aries piece, and that has a bit more information about houses there for you. Of course, if you know someone that you're close to who has a lot of Aquarius energy, then this information is really great for you as well, because it'll help you to understand them better and to look after them better. So it could be that that's your child, your parent, your partner, sibling, great friend, even a colleague. So Aquarius is an air sign, so it's the last of our air signs, and it is a fixed mode air. So that means it is a really strong air. The air is not going anywhere. The Aquarius energy is really focused on mental activity. So that's the same with all the airs. It's all about thinking. And so, although I said at the start, we're lightening things up with Aquarius because it is an air sign, it's not like it's a light-hearted, skipping among the tulips, not considering real life. It is a very mental energy. So it's all about thinking. It's quite intellectual, and Aquarius is very out of the box. It's a very eccentric, unusual way of thinking about things. It also it's very forward looking, very future oriented. So it's very much about innovation, and always with the goal of bringing about social change. Because of all this really strong fixed air quality, it may, however, mean that an Aquarius person doesn't have enough fire to take the steps that they need to bring about the action for all the things they're thinking about and the great, wonderful, amazing, different things that they could bring to the world. And also they might not have enough of the practical earthy qualities to make them happen. That's going to be entirely dependent on the individual, because we all have different balances of the elements. If you do need any more information about the air element and what that means in astrology and the zodiac, then please head back to Gemini, which was the first of our air signs. So, tropical Western astrology continues to make the association between the seasons and the zodiac. That's really their whole thing, is that the zodiac is aligned with the seasons, but it's not actually. If we're using sidereal astrology, then the seasons don't line up nearly as well as they do in tropical Western. But I do think that in every one of these sessions, I've been able to align in my mind some of the concepts, the energetic qualities of each of the sign with the point on the wheel of the year that we are at. So in sidereal astrology, Aquarius season is late winter in the northern hemisphere, late summer in the southern hemisphere. The other thing with the tropical Western way of looking at things in relation to the seasons is that it really only works in the northern hemisphere. So for those of us in the southern hemisphere, it becomes very tricky. So with this late winter, late summer time, to me, it's the point when the season that we're in, whether it's winter or summer, begins to lift. We start to have a few days where the weather's a bit different. So currently we're we're nearly into late summer here in the southern hemisphere, and you start to have a few more days where perhaps, it's not quite as bright and sunny, where the temperature is a bit lower. And then the same with winter. You might suddenly start to see some more sunshine. You might have temperatures that are a bit higher. So I feel like that is really that energy of Aquarius, of starting to do things differently. And, so we're moving towards the next in-between season of either spring or autumn. I really don't see that air quality of Aquarius fits in with the tropical Western season that it lands in. So the psyche of Aquarius is also perfect for this point in the year. So we've gotten things started with fiery Sagittarius for the new year, which is the perfect start to the new year. Then we've knuckled down and set things in place for a productive rest of the year with Capricorn. And now we've gotten into the groove, so things are kind of chugging along, and we can lift our heads up again, lift ourselves out of that daily grind a little bit to look around and think more broadly, to be a bit more philosophical about what could be better for ourselves and potentially also for others around us. The sign of Aquarius is ruled by the change maker Uranus in modern astrology. So in traditional astrology, Aquarius was ruled by Saturn, and Saturn also rules Capricorn, that you might remember from last season. So I feel like Aquarius is a lot happier under the rule of Uranus than under Saturn, because Saturn's energy, it's all about those boundaries and restrictions. Potentially you could see that as that Saturn energy keeping Aquarius in that sort of, I wrote down, keeping Aquarius weird, keeping it in its own quirky, eccentric self. But Uranus is the planet that brings about sudden change. So it's got a really original, independent energy to it, and that is so much more Aquarius to me than Saturn. The symbol of Aquarius is the water bearer. This does mean that often people assume that Aquarius is a water sign, but as we've already said, very much an air sign. So Aquarius is more like the cloud bearing the water, carrying the water, that suddenly will change the weather from beautiful sunshine to pouring rain that the land and the people need to survive. So in astrology, the astrological chart is divided into 12 houses, which refer to 12 different areas of life. So that allows us to see what the planets are going to have an effect on in our own lives. So if a planet or a sign is in a house, then that will give us that information about what area of life their energetic effect will be felt on. Each of the signs also rules one of the houses, and they have a particular affinity with the house that they rule. They feel comfortable there. If that planet lands in that house on your chart, it's going to be a really easy energy. Aquarius, as the 11th sign of the zodiac, rules the 11th house, and this is a house that is all about groups and community. So certainly does represent friendship groups. Close friends I see as more the 3rd house, which is a house of siblings as well. So those sort of close relationships sit more in the 3rd house, but it's about wider friendship groups. And also other groups that you may be involved in. So committees you may be on, teams that you're in, groups that you're involved with for your hobbies. It also has a very future-oriented energy, as I've already said, and can represent technology and innovation. Each of the signs of the zodiac, as you should know by now if you've been following this series, has a particular body type associated with it, rules particular parts of the body, is particularly prone to different types of conditions. So the air types generally have a thin and bony body, and that is generally true for our Aquarians. They don't break the mold with that, but do bear in mind that it's mainly that body type thing comes into play when it's the rising sign. So if you're an Aquarius rising, you're more likely to have that thin, bony body. It can also be brought about by, for example, if you have a heavily air quality to your chart, if that's the main element in your chart, you may have that body type as well. It's a pretty inexact science, the whole body type thing. From an Eastern medical point of view, the Aquarius constitution tends to be warm and moist. So what parts of the body does Aquarius rule? The blood and circulation, nerve impulses, the mitochondria, which are the powerhouse of our cells, the hypothalamus, the parathyroid, all the energetic flows, so the biorhythms, meridians, chakras, auras. It also does rule the lower leg, the calves and the ankles, and it shares that rulership partly with Pisces, and also partly with Sagittarius rules the legs as well to a great extent, and Capricorn. And also, interestingly, Aquarius rules the eyes. So what this means is Aquarius has a tendency towards ailments with these particular areas that I've just mentioned. So illnesses and injuries to those body parts are really common. Other things are cramps and spasms, epilepsy. Mental health concerns are really big for Aquarius because they've just got that huge mental energy about them. The brain is always going a million miles an hour, and perhaps not always, not being grounded in the body enough, and also not paying enough attention to emotional stuff. So mental health concerns are big, especially anxiety and being a bit nervy, really highly stressed and nervy type people. Anemia, blood pressure issues, varicose veins and hemorrhoids, and cold hands and feet due to circulatory issues. So I also like to think about the signs in relation to the chakras, the 7 essential energy centers that we all have in our systems. And to me, Aquarius has strong connections to the 2nd chakra or 2nd energy center, which I call the creation energy center, and also to the 7th chakra, the crown chakra, or I like to call this your connection energy center. So the creation energy center is, as the name suggests, where all our creative and innovative drive comes from, which is very much what Aquarius is about. And the connection energy center allows us to feel connected with all other beings, including the other people around us, which is again a very big Aquarius thing. So let's talk about some ways of looking after yourself if you are an Aquarius. or you have a lot of Aquarius energy. So firstly, so I like to go through my 5-star well-being approach, which includes movement, sleep, food, surroundings, and the 5th one is just called being, which covers everything else. So let's talk about movement first. So really any form of movement is going to be great for Aquarius because they are so much in their heads. They need to get grounded back into their bodies by becoming aware of their bodies, by moving their bodies. So any form of movement is going to be good. Find one you like and do it a lot. But team sports are something to really consider for Aquarians because they've got that whole community vibe about them. That could be a good thing to explore. Moving outside in fresh air, we've got this whole air thing going on, and bringing the fresh air into the system is really important for Aquarius. Next we'll go to sleep. So with all that high level of mental activity and mental energy, it can be difficult for Aquarians to access sleep enough. So really essential for them to prioritize their opportunity to sleep, so that is the amount of time they spend in a dark, cool bedroom, and also their sleep hygiene. So doing all the right things around getting off screens at least an hour before you're wanting to fall asleep, having a nice, quiet, relaxing bedtime routine, whether that's reading, whether that's having a bath, whether that's putting some essential oils on, listening to some relaxing music. All of those things are really important to help anyone, but especially our Aquarians, have good quality and quantity of sleep. And there will be links in the notes for you to access more information about that. Let's go then to food. So unsurprisingly, Aquarians have a tendency to like unusual food combinations and can also become kind of a bit addicted to eating one type of food or one food in a huge quantity, so especially salty things. They're quite prone to like them, so things like olives or anchovies or pickles. Foods that suit Taurians is also appropriate for Aquarius. So I'll have a link to the piece on Taurus for you to access. Warming, stimulating foods are really what our Aquarians need. Meat, onions, garlic, ginger, cabbage. Foods that support their nervous system, which is constantly being, the energy is constantly being depleted in the nervous system of Aquarians. So some good things are brewer's yeast, wheat germ, lecithin, omega-3 oils, seeds and nuts. Light, nourishing proteins. So they tend to not like really heavy, stodgy things that make them feel like they're being weighed down, because they want to keep that light, airy quality. So some good proteins are fish, eggs and tofu. Sodium chloride is the mineral that Aquarius tends to burn through the most, and so they need to eat foods that are high in this mineral, and that includes cabbage, corn, spinach, asparagus, celery, radish, lentils, seafood, strawberries, apples, figs, almonds and sesame seeds. Some herbs for Aquarians to eat are parsley, sage, ginger and kelp seaweeds. They're not really herbs, but that's something that is really important for them. They need to be balancing out their iodine quantities. There's lots of herbs that are great for Aquarius. A few that are great, common ones to use as teas are valerian, lemon balm and ginkgo, and also ginger, which I mentioned as a herb, makes a really nice tea as well. Surroundings, so I always talk about essential oils that I've identified that have the same energetic properties and qualities as the sign. So they're not going to bring about the opposite quality, opposite energetic state, but they're going to support what naturally is in being in Aquarius. So the essential oils I've identified are rosemary, litsea, magnolia and green mandarin. And if you go to the blog that I've written all about Aquarius, then you can get a bit more information about those oils. And lastly, let's talk about being. So, what are some of the things that Aquarians need to do to really look after themselves on a holistic level? And we're especially remembering that we're talking about their mental health. So, they can, because they're so community focused, not develop this strong, deep connections with individuals that all of us need to have at least a couple of. So, that is something to work on for Aquarians. Talk therapies can be useful for Aquarians because they help them to get things out of their heads into the open with somebody who is an impartial professional person. It can also be helpful when they're wanting to get stuff out of their heads for Aquarians to journal. That's a great thing for everyone to do. Energy healing helps to balance both mental and emotional energy and can be really useful to minimize tendencies toward mental health issues. So go for something like Reiki, kinesiology, or acupuncture. And a bark flower for Aquarius, which was identified by Dr. Bark when he created the bark flowers, was water violet. There are lots of others that are applicable, and it just depends on really what you're trying to work on, what you're trying to balance out as to what I'd recommend. So please get in touch if you'd like to know more. So I hope that you make the most of this amazing, inspirational energy of Aquarius season, and just remember to be aware of that sort of overstimulation that can happen when we're in that mental space, and make sure you do some other things to bring yourself back down to earth as well. But enjoy the energy. Be well.